Ey. Das fängt schon gut an.
Ja, was steht da?
Max Verstappen Freundin. Ist das das Erste? Was sie mal,
Kommt als erstes.
Okay. Keine.
Wie? Gibt's nicht mehr? Oh, habe ich auch wieder was Neues gelernt.
Ja,
Aha.
genau.
Ah, deswegen fragen die wahrscheinlich alle, ne? Die wollen ein bisschen...
Vielleicht. Ja.
Okay.
Ich
Gibt's denn...
bin wieder alleine, Kai.
Aha. Dann ist das eine Stellenanzeige jetzt.
Max Verstappen drops a bombshell about his affair with Dilara Sanlik, shocking the F1 world. The couple were reportedly introduced by Helmut Marko, Red Bull Racing's motorsport advisor, and began their relationship in late 2017. After nearly 3 years together, their relationship came to an unexpected end in October 2020. When questions about their sudden separation began to surface, Verstappen himself confirmed during a German TV interview that he was single. There was no major fight or scandal behind the breakup. The main reasons were reportedly the distance, Max's demanding F1 lifestyle, and the couple gradually drifting apart. How they met, what their relationship looked like behind the paddock walls, and why it eventually came to an end. Stick around, because this one has details even hardcore Formula One fans have missed. So how did this all start? According to multiple reports, it wasn't a chance encounter at a nightclub or a random meeting at a race weekend fan event. Instead, the connection reportedly traces back to Helmut Marko. Yes, that Helmut Marko, Red Bull Racing's longtime motorsport advisor, the man best known for shaping and mentoring young talent inside the Red Bull Junior Driver program for decades. Marko is said to have introduced Max and Dilara during a casual social setting, possibly connected to a winter sports trip in Austria. That detail actually fits pretty well, considering how often Red Bull's inner circle gathers together in the Austrian Alps during the off-season. It's a fitting origin story, honestly, because in Formula One, so much of a driver's personal world quietly overlaps with the team itself, and it seems Max's romantic life was no exception to that pattern. Now let's talk about how the relationship actually developed. It reportedly began quietly toward the end of 2017. At the time, Dilara wasn't part of the Formula One world in any way. She was described as a German student, originally from Munich, who was living and studying in London. That's a completely different life from the one Max was living, jumping from country to country for Grand Prix weekends almost every other week. For several months, the relationship stayed almost entirely out of the public eye. Then, in January of 2018, things changed. Dilara appeared alongside Max on his official Instagram page for the very first time during what looked like a winter holiday together. That single appearance was enough to send Formula One fan communities into full speculation mode. Screenshots circulated everywhere, fan pages picked up the story, and just like that, the rumor mill was officially running. Even with all that attention, neither Max nor Dilara rushed to confirm anything publicly. It wasn't until September of 2018, roughly a year after they're believed to have started dating, that the relationship was effectively acknowledged in public. By Formula One standards, where driver relationships often get thrust into the spotlight almost instantly, this was a noticeably slow and low-key rollout. Altogether, the relationship is reported to have lasted about 3 years, running from late 2017 all the way through late 2020. Now here's where things get interesting for fans who actually attend races in person. Dilara wasn't the type to chase cameras or turn race weekends into a fashion statement. By most accounts, she kept a fairly private profile, especially compared to some other paddock partners we've seen over the years in this sport. But that doesn't mean she was invisible. She was regularly spotted inside the Red Bull Racing garage, dressed in full team gear, watching Max's sessions from inside the pit box itself. And if you know anything about how tightly controlled paddock access actually is, that tells you she was fully embedded in his day-to-day world, not just an occasional visitor showing up for a single race. What's maybe even more telling is how close she reportedly became with Max's family. Camera crews and photographers repeatedly caught her standing alongside Max's mother, Sophie Koempen, and his sister, Victoria Verstappen, supporting him from the grid before races began. In a sport where family dynamics are often talked about just as much as the racing itself, think about how central Jos Verstappen's presence has been to Max's story. Being folded into that that inner family circle is a meaningful detail. For 3 full seasons, she was a consistent, if quiet, fixture inside Max's world. Through title fights, shifting team dynamics, and the growing pressure of being positioned as Formula One's next great championship threat. So what actually changed? The end of the relationship became public knowledge in October of 2020, and the way it came out was almost accidental. Max was doing a German television interview ahead of the Eiffel Grand Prix, and when the interviewer asked him about his personal life, he simply stated quite plainly that he was single. There was no dramatic reveal, no official statement, no scandal attached to it, just a direct answer to a direct question. That's one of the most notable things about this breakup. There wasn't a scandal behind it, no leaked arguments, no public fallout, nothing messy playing out across tabloids or social media. By most accounts, this was one of the more mature and quiet separations we've seen play out in this sport. So why did it end? A few reasons keep coming up across the reporting. First, there was the distance. Dilara was based in London, focused on finishing her university studies. Max, meanwhile, was living in Monaco and constantly on the move for the Formula One calendar, with testing, media obligations, and race weekends stacked back-to-back throughout the year. That kind of long-distance strain is difficult for any relationship to survive, let alone one operating under the intensity of a Formula One racing schedule. Second, there was Max's total focus on racing. By 2020, Max wasn't just another driver on the grid anymore. He was building toward his first real championship fight against Lewis Hamilton, a rivalry that would go on to define the sport for years afterward. Multiple reports suggest Max wanted to channel everything, every bit of his energy and focus into that championship push, which left very little room for anything else in his personal life. And third, maybe the simplest reason of all, they just gradually drifted apart. There was no blow-up, no betrayal, no single dramatic moment you could point to and say that's what ended it. Two people living increasingly different lives, one a rising global sports icon, the other a private university student, slowly grew apart from one another. It happens, even in the very public and high-pressure world of Formula One. Not long after the split became public, Max moved on and began his high-profile relationship with Kelly Piquet, one that, unlike this one, has played out very publicly in the years since. So that's the story of Max Verstappen and Dilara Sanlik, a relationship that ran for nearly 3 years, mostly out of the spotlight, before ending quietly right as Max's career was about to explode onto a completely different level. No scandal, no drama, just two people whose paths ran side by side for a few years before eventually splitting off in different directions. If you found this breakdown interesting, let us know in the comments which other Formula One relationship timelines you'd like us to cover next. And if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, because we're covering the real stories behind this sport all season long. Looking back at this timeline, what stands out most is the contrast with how Max's personal life is covered today. Back in 2017 and 2018, Formula One was a very different sport, with a smaller global audience and far less attention paid to drivers' personal lives outside the cars they were racing. Dilara had the benefit of dating Max during a period before his fame had truly exploded worldwide. By the time the relationship ended in 2020, Max was already a race winner and a rising title contender, but he wasn't yet the global superstar he'd become just 1 year later, in 2021, when his rivalry with Lewis Hamilton captured headlines everywhere. That timing is part of why this relationship stayed relatively low profile compared to what came afterward. It's also worth noting how differently this breakup was handled compared to some of the more publicized relationship stories we've covered before.
And it's Nico Rosberg, and Hamilton's onto the grass, and Hamilton's had a massive crash, and he's crashed into his teammate.
Toto Wolff breaks silence and makes a shocking revelation about the infamous 2016 Spanish Grand Prix crash involving Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. The two Mercedes teammates collided on the very first lap, sending both cars out of the race and handing a crucial victory to Red Bull. Toto Wolff was furious, and reportedly even discussed serious action with Mercedes chief Dieter Zetsche, including the possibility of suspending or even firing both drivers. But after the heated discussions, Wolff made a bombshell decision. If Hamilton and Rosberg crashed again because of their intense rivalry, they would have to pay 50% of the damage themselves, regardless of who was actually at fault. That decision showed just how serious the situation had become inside Mercedes. The financial punishment was huge, with Rosberg revealing that one crash alone cost him around $360,000. But was this bitter rivalry and the growing tension inside Mercedes also connected to Hamilton's later decision to leave the team? In this video, we break down what really happened, why Toto Wolff was so angry, and how the explosive Hamilton-Rosberg rivalry changed Mercedes forever. Let's go back to May 2016, the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona. Mercedes had dominated Formula One for 2 years straight, and the only real threat to their drivers came from each other. Hamilton and Rosberg were locked in one of the most intense championship battles the sport had ever seen. Two teammates, one car capable of winning every race, and only one seat at the top. On the opening lap, Rosberg defended his lead into turn 3. Hamilton went for the gap on the inside. The two cars touched, both spun off into the gravel, and Mercedes' guaranteed victory vanished completely. Red Bull, who had no real business winning that afternoon, inherited a shock 1-2 finish in front of a stunned home crowd. For a team used to complete dominance, this wasn't just a disappointing result. It was a genuine embarrassment, a self-inflicted disaster played out in front of a global audience. And it happened because two drivers on the same team couldn't find a way to share the same stretch of track. Team boss Toto Wolff was reportedly livid. According to Rosberg, Wolff stormed into the garage demanding to know what the two of them thought they were doing out there, furious that they had handed a certain win straight to what he called the fierce enemy. Here's where the story gets interesting. For years, fans only knew about the public fallout, the tense post-race press conferences, the frosty handshakes on the podium, the visible strain between two men who had known each other since their childhood karting days. But what nobody knew until very recently is that Wolff didn't just get angry and quietly move on. He picked up the phone to Mercedes' parent company chief Dieter Zetsche and had a serious conversation about disciplinary action against both of his star drivers. Speaking recently, Rosberg confirmed that this conversation truly happened, though he pushed back on the idea that outright firing was ever seriously on the table. In his own telling, the more realistic outcome discussed behind closed doors was a one-race suspension for one or possibly both drivers, a first-step punishment rather than an outright dismissal. Either way, the fact that Wolff felt the need to escalate this to the very top of Mercedes' corporate structure tells you how close this rivalry came to spiraling out of the team's control. And the most remarkable part of all, neither Hamilton nor Rosberg knew a single thing about it at the time. It stayed hidden behind closed doors for nearly a decade. So if firing them wasn't the final answer Mercedes settled on, what did Toto Wolff actually do instead? He introduced a financial punishment designed to make both drivers think twice before risking contact again. Wolff put a contract in front of both Hamilton and Rosberg that laid out one brutal rule. Anytime the two of them crashed into each other, they would each personally cover 50% of the total repair costs, no matter whose fault the stewards ruled it to be. Think about that for a second. It didn't matter if the official verdict said it